Late one Sunday afternoon, a family heads down to the river that runs at the bottom of their property. Washed up on the edge is a bin. The smell emanating from it was undeniable.
What is it, Dee?
What's the significant part about each of these locations? That they all come together.
And your premises at this stage appear to be unoccupied and we need to force entry.
She said if one of my children were missing, I'd be upset too.
That was a bad mistake.
It does raise your suspicions that something untoward may have occurred in the house itself.
Anyone else would be horrified that something that belongs to you is used in a murder.
I knew it was a whole bunch of lies, total lies.
I went to bed. I didn't sleep. I haven't slept much since.
The majority of murders are committed by people known to the victim. Their murders also occur within a few kilometres of where the killer lives. So when a body in a bin is washed up on the shores of a river, the crime scene and offender could be anywhere.
The bin was laying with its wheels facing the water as such, about 45-degree angle on the sand. The tide marks were on the side of it and it suggested that it had been in the water for some time. On closer inspection, you could really smell a really bad smell that was obviously something deteriorating inside at that stage. There's a hole in the bin, and I noticed that inside that hole I could see a foot. And then from there, crime scene unit and the homicide unit were contacted.
The first thing I noticed about the bin at the time was that the lid had been sealed with 42 hexagonal head Tex screws and a quantity of silicon sealant. The holes on the bin indicated that there had been some sort of mechanical damage to the bin with some type of instrument rather than damage that might have occurred naturally by running into things or being bumped or something of that nature. I removed the screws from the lid of the bin. All the screws were of a similar make and design. They were counted and taken into evidence. The silicon sealant was broken. This then allowed the bin lid to be opened, which I opened, and that revealed the contents of the bin. I could see a human foot. It was a right foot protruding from a rest of the matter that was wrapped in a blanket.
The obvious question, why is somebody inside the bin? What type of macabre thing might it be? Obviously someone's gone to great lengths to secure the bin and to try and immerse it in the water so it wouldn't be found.
We did do a search of the area, but there was no footprints around on the sand at all. There was no drag marks. There was nothing to suggest that it had been actually dragged and placed down onto the sand.
It'd be fair to assume that the bin had floated down the river and come to rest at that location.
How far it had floated along the 80-kilometre river was not known at this stage. And with night upon them, the search for clues would be resumed the next day.
The forensic pathologist advised that we secure the bin and carry it as a whole to the Westmead mortuary rather than bringing a specialist to that area where there was potential of losing any evidence that might have been included in the contents of that bin at the time.
So we'll meet you down the morgue.
We found the body inside that had been wrapped in a blanket and there was electrical type of wiring that had bound the body fairly tightly. Once that was taken off, we'd see the head had been severed, as were the hands. The body was mummified, it was very much decomposed. It was that of a male, probably in his 30s, 30 to 35 years of age. The exact cause of death wasn't known. There was no stabbing, there was no shooting injuries. It was simply just no head and no hands.
Without any access to dental or fingerprints, the first line of inquiry into finding out who the victim was had disappeared. The killer had believed that this would slow the police investigation down, but it hadn't.
We located a number of tattoos on both arms of the deceased, and that certainly provided police with something in which to pursue the identity of that person.
Identifying the body was crucial. So the only way we could really do it was through a media appeal.
Police are appealing for public help to identify a murder victim whose dismembered body was found in a wheelie bin on the outskirts of Sydney. The man, aged between 20 and 40, had been decapitated. His hands had also been cut off. Detectives say the body has tattoos of a rose and barbed wire on the arms.
We're relying upon the tattoos to see whether relatives or friends will come forward and say, that's my son, that's my brother.
A murder investigation's begun after the discovery of a headless body in a wheelie bin at Cola River, northwest of Sydney. A family found the bin on the riverbank yesterday, sealed with screws and silicone.
Police divers searched the Colo River where the bin was found, but didn't find anything that could help identify him.
The only identification police had was 2 tattoos on the arms of the corpse and the knowledge of when he likely had been killed.
The condition the body was found in gave us an indication it had been in the water for some time, for some months. And somebody must have seen that bobbing up the river. So you start looking at caravan parks, you look at water skiers, anyone that might frequent the area, to try and work out a time frame on when the bin was seen. And then if we can keep working our way back to a point, and hopefully at that time we'll identify the body, and then we'll start to work out when that person was last seen and try and match it up with sightings of the bin. So we went to some of the waterway authorities, and certainly we did find a man that had been along the river some weeks beforehand and seen the bin bobbing in the river. And of course it was a danger to other boats, so he simply just pushed it across to the riverbank. Of course we're looking for the next part, which is where the bodies enter the river. So we went along the riverbanks, we looked at caravan parks, thinking that could the murder have occurred on the riverbank itself upstream somewhere, and whether there's any roads leading down, if there's any boat ramps or things like that, because there might be some telltale signs. It could be tyre tracks, it could be clothing, it could be the murder weapon within these other sites.
The chances of finding anything were minute. Fortunately for the investigation, the publicity surrounding the body in the bin and the tattoos were successful.
We got a number of calls, predominantly about the sighting of the bin, which was good for us, but in particular we did get a call from a lady in Candos that in August of 1998, her brother-in-law had gone missing.
The time frame of this man's disappearance fitted in with the decomposition. More importantly, the tattoos on the body were exactly those of the missing man.
Today, a photo of Peter Aston has been released. Police believe him to be the victim, although it will be 6 to 8 weeks before DNA testing can positively prove identification.
I stress at this stage that we believe it to be Peter Aston. Certainly he hasn't been seen since the 9th of August, and there's been no movement on his account, so we firmly believe it to be him. Once we identified Peter, of course now he comes from Candos, so this puts a second area into the investigation. We've got a body that's found in a river at Colo, just outside of Windsor, and all of a sudden we identify the body to Peter living at Candos, which is a country community over the top of the Blue Mountains out near Mudgee. So it's some considerable distance apart.
Peter often used to sit out on his front step very early of a morning with his cup of coffee, sit in the sun and look at the mountains. God's country, he called it. As a child, he was probably the clown of the household. Peter got on with his siblings fairly well. His older brother, they were pretty close because they were more of the same age. He lived a reasonably quiet life and kept fairly well to himself. Small circle of friends, but very good friends to him.
The homicide detectives learned that the last time anyone saw Peter was the 9th of August.
That's right.
His brother and nephew were with him, and his mother had called in to say she would be at his home the following morning to help him spruce up his place.
So the next day, Merrill turns up on the 10th of August, knocked on the door, Peter wasn't there.
I'd made some curtains for him to hang, and he wasn't there. And there was a very cold, empty feeling in that house. And I sort of had a little look around, and he'd brought a mattress out onto the lounge room floor, within about 3 feet of the fireplace. That was for warmth because he had no heating other than that. And I realised that that fireplace was icy cold. It hadn't been lit the night before, so with the bed there, not slept in, and the fire hadn't been lit, that was very unusual. And that, I think, was the thing that started me really worrying about Peter. When I walked out of Peter's house that morning, Peter's friend, the man that lived next door, I asked him, had he seen Peter and did he know where he was? And he said, I wouldn't worry about him, he'll be back by tomorrow because he's helping me with the fence.
At the early stage, we didn't suspect foul play. We believed that Peter might have just gone walking in the bush, gone camping in the bush, and believed that he might have just left the area for a short time without actually letting his family know.
So what's caused such a violent act to happen, to decapitate a person and put their body in a bin and then transport it hundreds of kilometres away and dump it in a remote area? What's caused him to suddenly be killed? It was a real dilemma for us.
The detectives hoped that the answer would be found in Peter's house, but that was impossible. 4 days before Peter's body was found at the river, his house was burnt near to the ground.
Peter Aston's house is a fibro premises. It was a housing commission residence. The interior of the place was clear. There was no furnishings in the premises. The lounge room and dining area walls were still intact, but they had heat and fire damage. At the other end of the house with the bedrooms, the gyprock had fallen in, the roof had collapsed, and it was basically the frames. The chances of the fire originating from electrical fault were ruled out as the power had been disconnected and the fuses removed.
Accelerant was used within the house. There was some residue, oily residue on the grass. So, yeah, certainly there were a lot of strong indications the house had been deliberately lit. If the murder occurred in that house and somebody's trying to destroy evidence, you would have thought that it would have been done well beforehand. Why wait 3 months to try and destroy evidence?
The investigation into Peter Aston's murder was providing more questions than it did answers.
We've got a lot of the jigsaw pieces coming together, but they're still a bit fragmented.
But within the bin was a piece of the jigsaw puzzle that would provide a perfect fit. Police knew that Peter Aston was the victim of a vicious murder. They also knew they were 4 months behind in their investigation. Added to the frustration was the fact that his house had been gutted by fire. Police were left with little clues, except the bin.
The bin had GLCC, which is Greater Lithgow City Council, but we just had the number 2 on the bin, so obviously there was going to be a lot of those numbers around the area. But at least we had a geographic location of where the bin came from. And then obviously we're keen to see what else is inside the bin. There might be some other bit of evidence in there. Could even be the murder weapon, could be within the bin. We found a couple of rusted knives. We found a silicone tube. We found some naphthalene flakes that were used to inhibit the smell from the bin.
There was an area of damage on the outside of the bin. It was very deliberate. It had very sharp edges. It was cut. It had quite an unusual shape to it. Inside the garbage bin, I located a piece of green plastic that had a series of white numbers, and that was certainly the serial number that had been placed on that bin during manufacture. And it matched perfectly to the shape on the external portion of the bin, which indicated that that serial number had been cut out of that bin.
Fortunately, the serial number's fallen inside the bin with the body, and the person hasn't gone to the further step to try and retrieve it. He thought, well, the body's going to submerge in the water. We don't have to worry about this anymore, and it was a huge oversight. We've now got a serial number that can attach it to a specific address in Lithgow. So now we've got a body that's found at Colo in outer Sydney. We've got a bin that originates from Lithgow, and we've got a body that comes from Candos. Now, these 3 areas aren't close. They're hundreds of kilometres apart. What's the common link? What's the thread to each of these locations that they all come together? The detective that worked on the case with me, she rang the local police at Candos and started to talk about Peter, about his lifestyle and who he hung around with. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, the local policeman said, well, he lives next door to a man called Bruce Patterson. And of course, Bruce Patterson was the man that owned the bin at Lithgow. So this is our link.
Bruce Patterson had an address in Lithgow, lived in Lithgow, and his ex-wife had an address living next door to Peter Aston in Candos. Bruce was there most of the time. From the information that we'd received, Peter had a fairly good relationship with Bruce Patterson as a friend and would be seen together on a number of occasions.
In fact, Bruce was the person Meryl Astle had spoken to about the disappearance of her son.
I think you'd have to quietly have suspicions. Just how can the coincidence be that a garbage bin that belongs to Bruce from Lithgow is used in a murder, and lo and behold, Bruce Patterson lived next door to Peter at Candos with his strange wife.
With their suspicions aroused, police conducted a search at Patterson's house in Lithgow.
We're presently executing a search warrant on number 2 Page Street, P-A-G-E, Street, Lithgow. The premises at this stage appear to be unoccupied and we need to force entry.
First impressions of the house was that it was a very tidy house. It had been cleaned. There was no furniture in the place at all, so it was obviously vacant. You go in and see cleaning products in the house and say, well, possibly when people move out, the last thing they do is clean up. But in the circumstances of what you're told, having cleaning products there does raise your suspicions that something untoward may have occurred in the house itself.
Floor maintenance zip strip.
One of the areas that of concern was in the second bedroom of the premises, due to the fact there was a large area of staining apparent on the carpet at the time. The stain potentially could have been blood. When I pulled the carpet back, I could immediately see that there was quite a fair bit of staining underneath the carpet, on the underlay and also on the timber floorboards that were below the carpet as well.
The main room we looked at was the bathroom, and when we had a closer examination of it, it was very clean. The bath itself had a new white film over it, similar to paint, like it had been repainted. It was possible the body had been decapitated in that room. The evidence there that it had been lost down through the drain system.
The pipes were disconnected and sent for testing, along with blood samples from the house.
Until we could confirm that a crime had occurred there, it was simply just a house that had been cleaned up.
Police also conducted a search at Bruce Patterson's ex-wife's place. Bruce Patterson was there, and detectives brought him in for questioning.
Firstly, to ask his reasons for why his bin was used in the murder. Can he explain the reasons why? Because really, the only evidence we had to link him to the murder was the bin. Could it be the case that somebody has stolen his bin and poor Bruce is just a person who just got caught up in it? That all of a sudden the connection to him is merely the bin.
Unbeknownst to the police, the questioning of Bruce Patterson had triggered its own connection for Meryl Astle. On the same day she spoke with Bruce Patterson, his ex-wife was also there.
And I said to her, have you seen Peter anywhere? I'm worried he's not here. And she started to cry. And she said, well, I know if one of my children were missing, I'd be upset too.
Now, what I intend to do today is ask you a number of questions about your knowledge of Peter Astle and any information you may have about the discovery of this body. At that stage, we had a valid reason, certainly, to talk to Bruce. We've got a bin that belongs to Bruce. We've got Bruce, one of the last person to be sighted with Peter. So that's our starting point. When was the last time you saw Peter Astle?
I'm not too sure exactly when, but I know just a reckoning offence for ex-wife.
You erecting the fence?
Yeah, Peter was out the back having coffee in the morning, and I was digging the holes for the fence.
We gave a lot of consideration to the fact that we're missing some body parts that haven't been found. And all of a sudden there's lots of holes that would have been dug to put this new colourblind fence in, so does it present an opportunity to get rid of some evidence? We used some cadaver dogs to go and sniff along the fence line. We didn't find anything, of course. How were the panels connected to the poles itself? Are they screwed on?
Yep.
And where did you get the screws and the equipment to do that?
They all come up in the kit.
So now we're starting to think, well, the tech screws that were found in the bin are those that are used to erect a colourblind fence. So again, it's another little piece of the jigsaw that we're looking at now. All right, the picture that I'm showing you is of the bin. This was a bin that was recovered from the Colo River.
Mm-hmm.
Well, did your bin have those screws on them before?
No.
Now, in that bin, it was the body of a man who we believe to be Peter Aston. Do you understand that?
Yeah, makes sense.
So what we're saying is that in the bin that belonged to you is the body of a man called Peter Aston.
Mm-hmm.
Have you got any explanation as to how come a dead body turns up in your bin that's from Lithgow and else at Colo?
No.
Were you responsible for putting the body in the bin?
No.
His demeanour didn't change. Anyone else, you'd be horrified that firstly that something that belongs to you is used in a murder, and all of a sudden you think you'd be saying something along the lines of, this is terrible, you know, how can this possibly happen?
I did lose my bin, but there was been houses demolished down around the corner, so I just got one from there.
When did you lose your bin?
Times and dates and that, I'm not too sure, but...
And then because you haven't found, you've decided to take another one to replace it?
No, or you can put it down as stealing or whatever, but yeah, I didn't.
All of a sudden I'm challenging him about his bin, and he's coming back to me saying, I stole a bin, charge me with stealing a bin. You can't tie me into this murder.
As Patterson's interview continued, so did the search in Candos, at his ex-wife Lynette's house.
We're at the Candos address. We examined a motor vehicle that was located in the rear yard. It was an older model car and in very poor repair. There was evidence that the side protector strips and the bumper bar had come off, and they were reattached to the vehicle using tech screws. There was also evidence of damage around the lights, which had been sealed with silicone. We took the vehicle back to Bathurst crime scene section to make a more thorough examination of both the interior and exterior of the vehicle. There was 2 circular marks that appeared on the bench seat. Our initial thoughts when we saw these marks that the possibility that the bin had been placed in the back seat of the Commodore. We actually placed a Sule bin in various positions to see if we could match up those marks on the back seat of the car. Once we did this, we couldn't positively say that the marks came from the Sule bin, but conversely, we couldn't rule out that these marks came from that Sule bin.
So there was nothing really of significance that they were able to glean from the car itself, but we've got evidence that, yes, we can show that he used the tech screws and silicone. Those in itself don't prove the case. It's just another little piece that we've got to work with.
Detective Oxford was also working with the suspicion that the murder may have occurred in Patterson's spotless and furnitureless house in Lithgow.
So you live there by yourself?
That's right.
If your house has got no furniture in it, how have you lived in there? Where have you slept?
So I was in a sleeping bag.
So you take a sleeping bag with you and you sleep in a sleeping bag in the house itself?
That's right.
Have you cleaned the bathroom up at all?
I had scratches in the bathtub.
Would you spray it with enamel, did you?
Push back can, yeah. Push back can.
And what was that, just white gloss enamel?
Yeah.
No? Bruce simply just said that he was moving out to allow new tenants in, and that he wanted it to be known that I've left it in a good state.
It's widely known that you have to, leave as you come. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like if you're privately or anything, you do the same type of thing.
You've got to accept it, unless you can prove otherwise. If we could disprove that by finding hair and other things in these sinks, or if we found blood in the pipes, well, then a different significance will be put onto his explanation.
The evidence came back negative. There was no blood, no hair. Nothing that linked Patterson and his house to the murder of Peter Aston. All police could do was to take his interview apart bit by bit to see what was truth and what were lies.
In the interview, he said he sold all his furniture and gave it away to the St Vincent de Paul down in Lithgow. Of course, we made some inquiries down there, and that proved that, in fact, Bruce hadn't taken any furniture down there. So all of a sudden, he's starting to develop a little bit of a chink in his armour. He's starting to say things that ultimately were lies. So then you start to look at his movements at the time. We've got a tentative date of the 9th of August when Peter's gone missing, and we know that he told us in the interview he was putting a fence up, so we know that he's there.
Hi, g'day.
The next step is to start doing a door knock around Candos. Firstly, to establish did they know Peter and when did they last see him, and did they hear or see anything on that night. And at about midnight, a neighbour said she heard the sound of a dog barking coming from the area around near Bruce's house, and then she heard a car leaving Bruce's house. That's not unusual, but when you put it together with all the other bits and pieces, suspicion was pointed at Bruce. There weren't any other great suspects that really were there. So then we start to look at the house file. Could that in fact have been the crime scene? Could Bruce have burnt the house down as well to try and destroy evidence?
Detectives believed Bruce Patterson had likely murdered Peter Aston, but they couldn't prove it and they had no motive. Then, 4 months into the investigation, they received a phone call from a psychiatrist.
In fact, he had a client who wanted to confess that he'd killed someone, that he'd shot someone and then decapitated the body, taken the head and the hands off, and then put the body into a bin and dumped it in a river. So I've asked the obvious question, well, who was your patient? And he said, Bruce Patterson.
Police found him at his ex-wife's place at Candos.
Once I told him that I'd spoken to the doctor, he accepted his fate then. He said, yeah, I killed Peter. I'm responsible. Mrs. Patterson, what I have here is a search warrant to search a premises for a number of items in connection with the death of Mr. Aston. And then what I propose to then is take you back to Mudgee Police Station where we'll ask you a number of questions in relation to the death of Peter Aston. Do you understand that? Sure. I can get you to tell your story as to what's happened in relation to Peter.
While we were drinking heavily and listening to music, and he had his fire going in the lounge room. Now, when I went to the house that night, I had no intentions of shooting him. What it was all drinking heavily and and just a topic of conversation which aggravated me. And he then got violent and swung an axe round into the floorboards just before my foot. Then he raised the axe up again to hit me, and I pulled the firearm off the tote and shot him in the head.
Okay, now how did the pistol come to be in Peter's house?
Well, Peter had a thing about pistols and I only brought it over to show him.
All right, can you describe what the gun looks like to me?
It's a .357 Magnum revolver.
Well, why did you buy the pistol?
Good question. Probably the novelty initially. I was looking at doing an armed robbery at one period of time, but I didn't go ahead with it. But I never would have thought to use it for a murder, not murder, but to shoot someone.
And what's happened then?
Then felt pretty numb and shocked what I'd done. Then decapitated in his head, in his hands.
With that axe?
Yeah.
And what have you done then?
I burnt the body parts to conceal the incident.
And what's happened then?
What happened then, I just got a blanket and threw it over him to pick him up and put him in the car, take him to a spot where I could dump him until I could later think what I had to do.
Then he drove some 25, 30 kilometres away to a place called Wishing Well, just outside of Candles or Mudgee.
Mr Patterson's indicated he's prepared to show us where he's disposed of the body of Peter Aston after he was killed at Candos. Now, the difficulty we may have here is because of the sound of the generators in the background from the rescue, Scott, so we'll try our best to keep our voice up. Why did you decide this site to dispose of Peter's body? Why did you pick this particular site here?
Well, I didn't want to travel too far out of town because I had to get rid of the evidence in the house, with the burning of his head and hands.
Now, can you just show us how you put the body in there?
Well, it pretty well much falls away there, so the momentum of the body just kept falling and running down the hill until such times as to where the detective is. And then I hid the blanket over in amongst scrub like this stuff over here, this brackish bush.
Okay, now, the area we're standing, is that where the body finished?
No, I moved it over to the side, past the tree.
When have you returned back here?
A month to 5 weeks, 6 weeks, around that top
About 6
period.
weeks?
Yeah. I took the garbage bin all the way down there because there's no way I could get him out bar for pulling it up there.
All right, so when you get down to the bottom, what condition was the body in?
Decomposed.
Now the body's now in the bin itself and it's all tied up. You've driven to where?
To Lithgow.
And what have you done with that bin then?
I sealed it.
Seal it with what? What did you seal it with?
Silicon and tech screws.
Now I want to show you a photograph now. Now that serial number appeared on the bin itself. Now is that the area that you cut out?
Yeah.
And what was the reason why you cut that out?
Just not identified the address.
He's gone to all these great lengths to stop us from finding who this person is and tried his best to conceal it. And there's one little mistake, that little serial number that he's cut off, it's fallen inside the bin with the body. Ultimately, it was the key to the whole thing, was his serial number. That was a bad mistake.
Well, I could have unscrewed it all and everything else, but with the decomposing body in there, it wasn't worth it.
Okay. Okay, and what's happened from there?
And the following day, took it to the collar to put it in the water. We went along the riverbank to a place where I could wade out in the water and try and submerge it, but realising I wouldn't submerge, I knew that it'd be found and eventually.
Patterson had driven 2 hours to the spot where he dumped the bin. 10 kilometres upstream from where it was found washed up on the shore.
Bruce Raymond Patterson appeared before Mudgee Court yesterday. During the brief appearance, police tendered evidence that they had attended the 37-year-old's home the day before, and he later confessed his involvement in the murder of Peter Aston.
I was frightened of what extreme I'd gone to in shooting him. And it was in self-defence.
It wasn't my fault. He attacked me. I know I had to repel the threat. So he's looking to try and get himself out of it. So you've got to start to explore to see whether what he said is plausible, whether in fact that is believable and whether it can be backed up by evidence.
Bruce Patterson had confessed to killing Peter Aston in self-defence. But police had strong reservations about his version of events.
We've got a man who was to confess to doing the murder, but there's an explanation to try and limit his involvement, to limit his culpability.
So,
which part of his body did you aim the pistol at?
At his head.
Anywhere, any part on his head at all?
Mainly around the body. Okay. He was brain dead when he hit the floor.
We're looking at a cold-blooded, premeditated murder. We're looking at more of a matter of violence that's occurred within a split second. Well, what was your intention when you pointed the pistol at him?
Just to get him to stop it and back down.
What was your intention when you fired the pistol?
Wasn't an intention to kill him at all.
What's to say that Peter wasn't shot from behind? and an entry wound is in the back of the head. So how do you start to claim self-defence if you've got an entry wound in the back of a person's head? Could he have been executed? And the reason why the head hasn't been found is to stop us showing that in fact it could have been execution.
Patterson told police that he had burnt the head in Peter's fireplace.
The house was burnt down before we came to know that it was Peter's house. So our crime scene people trawled through the local tippet candles where the house had been demolished and found the fireplace and did some sampling from it. There was no fatty residue within the fireplace. So where is the evidence to show that a head was burnt in there?
As suspected, Bruce Patterson was the arsonist.
Can you give me a reason why you set fire to the house?
Because of what happened in the house, I decided to burn the house in case he had forensics and had to go through it.
The house fire itself was 4 days before the body was found.
Sure.
So preempting that the bin was eventually going to be found.
I knew.
So you took it upon yourself to set the fire.
When Patterson made those statements that he'd murdered Peter in the house and mutilated him in the house, I knew it was a whole bunch of lies. Total lies, because I was there the next morning at 9 o'clock. There were no axe marks in the floor at all, and there wasn't a spot of blood anywhere. I had cleaned that house from top to bottom, and also the Housing Commission inspector, when I handed the house back, he'd been through and inspected it and found nothing untoward.
Now, earlier on this morning, you said, I didn't want any rejects moving in next door to my kids.
That's correct.
You recall you said that?
That's correct.
So that is the reasons why you said you burnt the house down, to get rid of any evidence that was there from Peter Aston's death.
Yeah.
And also another issue, you didn't want other undesirables moving in next door. Is that right?
That's correct.
Because you're concerned for your kids.
The body of circumstantial evidence against Patterson was strong, but there was every chance the jury would accept his plea of manslaughter over the charge of murder. Then a phone call came in that increased the odds for the prosecution.
It was about a week before the murder trial was due to start, and we received advice from the solicitor of Lynette Patterson to say that she had some information about what had occurred.
Lynette Patterson was the woman Merrill Aston had seen crying.
I really thought back onto when his ex-wife was crying the day Peter was missing, and I sort of thought for a long, long time that Bruce Patterson had something to do with Peter's disappearance.
Lynette Patterson, I'm able to say to you that what you say to us now won't be used against you in any court proceedings. Do you understand that?
I understand.
So let's bring our memory back to around about the 9th or 10th of August of 1998. What do you recall about that?
That night, Bruce had decided that he was going to go and kill Peter. I had tried to stop him, and at the time, I even wanted to go forward to the police to let them know what he'd had in mind, but I was just too scared.
Dad, let's get in the car, I'll get Pete.
He coerced him by telling him that he'd take him down to Sydney to get drugs. And that's how he got him out of the house and used alcohol, brought a carton of beer, tea with him. He took his father with him as well when he took Peter away. And as I said, I never thought they'd even go through with it. The next thing that happened, I don't know what time it was, that he came back and he came inside and the fire was going. Came in, he had Pete's head and hands in an esky, put them in the fire. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. I haven't slept much since. Then the next morning I had to get up and clean the fireplace out. And then he got me to clean the car.
All of a sudden we've got a version that is different to his version. He's driven out on a road somewhere and said we just killed him.
He said that he'd taken him out there and stopped at a truck stop. That's a resting place. And could see the lights to Sydney. Peter had apparently said that he wanted to go to the toilet. And then apparently Peter had hopped out of the car and he went to the toilet, and Bruce just called him to his attention and said, Peter, and apparently shot him.
Self-defence is not an issue now, really. I think it's a case of premeditated. Now we've got a new murder scene at a truck stop in Kurrajong. Bruce's father's died within the last year, so we'll never really know the true involvement, if any, of his father in this.
1 month later, Lynette Patterson said she accompanied her ex-husband and his father back to Kurrajong to pick up Peter's body. They then drove back to his house in Lithgow, where she saw Peter's body placed in the bin.
He left the bin in the laundry for a week, and then he went back and sealed it.
And you said the cutting of the serial number, when did that
Cutting of the serial number, that took place there and then.
Were you there when he was cutting it?
Yeah.
Did he make any comment
Yeah,
about it?
dropped into it. He said he had to get rid of it because that'd be a way of the bin being traced back to his place.
So it turned out to be a very strong case, but I suppose in a way, without Lynette Patterson's statement, without the confession, without the serial number, it could have been the perfect murder.
I've gone through a nervous breakdown this year because of it all, just knowing what I knew, trying to keep quiet and wanting to go forward. I mean, I've had bashings off him, I've had him hold a knife to my throat, put a scratch on my throat, and this is why I've kept quiet in regards to the matter with Peter.
But why had her ex-husband so brutally murdered his neighbour?
In actual fact, the reason why is because it was a housing commission house, and having housing commission people next door, that's why he did it.
Because Peter lived in a housing commission house, he didn't want his wife and children exposed to people living in that environment, and he had to be eliminated.
He had a dislike for Peter, whatever, and that was it.
And the way to rectify the problem, what was to go across and kill him? Is that what he was saying?
That's what he was thinking, yeah.
And with Peter gone, he wasn't going to allow anyone else the opportunity.
In fact, Bruce lived in a housing commission house at Lithgow himself, so it's quite ironic that he could make that judgment. And once Lynette Patterson came forward with the new information and provided evidence on the first day of the trial was to start, Bruce has changed his plea to guilty.
It became known as the body in the bin murder. 38-year-old Bruce Patterson confessed to the crime and today was sentenced in a Sydney Supreme Court to 22 years for the murder and 4.5 years for arson.
Some justice had been done, but never enough. He should have been sentenced to life with no parole. Life meaning life.
Patterson will be eligible for parole in the year 2018.
I hate Bruce Patterson with a vengeance. And as I put in my victim statement, if ever a door opens for him, I'll be there to close it. Or I'll do the very best that I can to close it.